Oh yes, I see that people are joining us, which probably means that the second parallel session has come to an end. Yeah. So we are waiting for 1 more minute, and for the participants from the second parallel session to join us for this concluding session of the day, the closing remarks. We'll wait for some minutes, seconds, not minutes. I guess you're all a bit tired, maybe, after this very long day. We'll keep it short, I promise. We'll keep it short, but we also think it's worthwhile an attempt to wrap up and conclude. So I don't see many more coming in from the other session. Can you confirm, someone who was in the other session, that this is concluded now?
Yeah, it's over now. The other session.
Yeah, so people used the opportunity to just slip into a well-deserved evening or afternoon for those from Latin America. I think we should start, right? So we are about 35 or so participants, which is I think for such a long day. Morning. We even have California here, so morning. Yeah, I mean, I'm about to mention that. So yeah, so welcome back here into the main panel, where Stefan and I will, as I said, there's where we will try to ourselves in some closing remarks. The first thing that I'd like to do, and maybe you want to move the slide, Stefan, is to say thanks to all of you, right? To the presenters, for those who joined us as guests, as audience, for very interesting papers, very engaged discussions. I've been going from session to session today, and I've seen many engaged presentations. We covered, I think, quite a number of very important aspects of sustainability in global value chains, from environmental impacts of GVC participation to the consequences of reshoring and nearshoring, with some environmental, some sustainability aspects being covered. We talked about resilience and the reactions of actors and the value chains themselves to global shocks. We discussed in almost all of the sessions some aspects of the governance of global value chains, in particular the role of voluntary standards, of markets, and the effects of and regulation. We had a look at different business models. We had a look into firms, into the effects of regulatory measures on firms' behavior. But we also looked at the consumer side, and in a couple of papers, in particular today in the afternoon today. We also took what I have labeled here sectoral deep dives into sectors where the issues are discussed in this conference are particularly salient, in mining, in garments, in automotives, where global value chains and sustainability therein plays a particularly important role. So thanks to all of you for this. And then a particular thanks to those behind the scenes, the team from the different institutions and institutes involved. I list them here, I don't read them again, but I want to mention the names. I want to mention Eugenia, who has not appeared. Then there's Stefan, who you can also see. I can see him here. There's Frauke, who has moderated the previous session in this channel. And there were more who helped organize this conference and helped that it functioned so smoothly. So we didn't have, at least I'm not aware of any issues that we had, be it connection-wise, be it in terms of who was supposed to be where and say something at one point. Okay, that's it. What we do in the next 10 minutes max is that we'll not try to summarize everything what has been said. That's a task, too big a task, and also one that might turn out to be a very lengthy one. But what we'll try to do is to give you some very subjective, selective insights into what we think were highlights of the conference and what we understand as important lessons learned. And I hand over to Stefan.
Yeah, thanks. Also from my side, thanks a lot to all the presenters and discussants and inputs into the discussion. So as Jan said, just some brief ideas about what we have learned. And I think one of the points that stood out to us was that, well, GVC regulations, as they are discussed, they may have potential adverse effects on trade and employment, which need to be watched. So already in the keynote, we saw that, in fact, already relatively simple trade policies such as tariffs are not that well understood in the context of GVCs, but that paper also showed quite large negative employment effects of these anti-dumping tariffs for the US. And this might be exemplary of many intended and unintended effects that could also be related to GVC-related measures. And we have seen one early stage research on the loi de vigilance, which exactly showed this kind of negative trade effect. Something else that we think that we have seen in this conference is that we did gain a better understanding about which actors within and across value chains are responsible for, in this case, for example, environmental degradation emissions. Here, we had one session where we had a lot on different countries, different types of value chains, different types of firms or firms in different positions within value chains. And these type of findings may help us to target better the policy interventions and to see how we can address these concerns. In general, we have the impression that there is a strong conceptual foundation and a very good understanding of GVCs in general. So we seem to know a lot about the complexity of production networks, and for example, the power relations within GVCs or in where firms position within GVCs. Here we have seen sectoral, country, or case studies. For example, on the textile sectors, we just had a session, but we also have seen insights from electronics and the governance and exactly how the different actors play a role in these sectors. We also saw this more from a quantitative point of view. We have input-output analysis. We looked at different types of specialization, and from the micro level, for example, we saw one study on the very detailed firm-to-firm production network of former Kenyan firms, for example. So in general, there seems to be a good understanding and this description of different characteristics within GVC. At this point, we have the impression that there are still important evidence gaps which relate to the enforcement, to the compliance, or the impact of specific policies, well, in the field of sustainability initiatives, of course. This could be on different buyers and sellers, it could be on workers or on the environment in particular. However, there are, of course, some exceptions, and we just saw, for example, as one example, in the last session, one aspect of a successful policy, which was that in this case, blacklisting did indeed reduce deforestation and led to intensification, basically more of more sustainable soil production. We have also seen that often successes seem to be partial, right? So we looked at certification schemes, which seem to be successful in improving agricultural practices, formalizing regular work. However, in this study here, we have seen that it did not enhance food security. At the same time, we know that GVC-related firms tend to pay higher wages than other firms. But again, we have seen that overwork is very common in these type of firms. Different type of study from the consumer side, we saw that, well, information provision seems to, for example, increase the willingness to pay, the willingness to purchase, right, which means that people are interested in buying the things, but not willing to pay for more sustainable products, which of course also has effects on the sustainability of GVCs more generally. And with this, I'd like to hand over again to Jan.
Yes, and these findings are often based on what we call here cool data. Cool data in the sense that these are data that are already used, but there's much more to come, we believe. And we give you on this slide here some examples of the very innovative data sources that will, in our view, will be increasingly used, in particular with regard to the study of sustainability in GVCs. One very important source of information will be data from monitoring systems. And that's really in an infant stage at this point. Right? There was one paper, this one here, where we have wage data from thousands of audits of firms. We have we had a call for papers previously where we also had a very interesting data set that came from a database on automotive suppliers, where basically the suppliers, all automotive suppliers of German automotive manufacturers, were providing data on their supplier firms. A very interesting data set that is, however, not publicly available, but this is, we think, a very promising path to more interesting, to a lot of interesting empirical research. We have seen satellite imagery being used. We see that in that one paper that was already mentioned on deforestation. But there's another one that was unfortunately not presented on mining operations in Burkina Faso, where the authors also use what is happening on the ground, track what is happening on the ground via satellite imagery. Then the data source that increasingly becomes available is that on is transactional data. Let's call it like that. That can be firm, in particular firm-to-firm transactions, and most notably transactions between buyers and suppliers. And there's one example here in this conference, but there's much more to come in this particular strand of literature. Again, referring to that Brazil paper that uses also an interesting data source that is not so common, is that basically one that connects the location of production with trade flows. That, of course, is a very important data feature that might become increasingly available. And that is, of course, different to trace, very important to trace environmental impacts of commodities back to the place of production. But this is a lot, I've talked a lot about quantitative data, but it's not only about this data source. We have seen in this conference very interesting qualitative data, for example, on overlooked actors, be it the data on resellers used by this paper here, but also on mechanisms. For example, the use of technology, as in the paper on the use of blockchains, and in the second paper that I mentioned here, also on the use of financial technologies. Then there's, on the consumer side, very interesting data that is being collected, but that will also become increasingly available. And this is also an important piece of the puzzle, be it in terms of how people, the willingness to pay for more sustainably produced product, but that's of course only one tiny part of the whole story. All right. Yeah, so I think we think there's a lot more that can be learned about sustainability in global value chains, based on, but not exclusively on these type of data. Can you go to the next slide, Stefan? So a few words on where we think the research might be heading, and to sum up. The conference has brought together, as you have witnessed, very different streams of research on sustainability in global value chains. We have seen business, we have seen economics, we have seen pole size / governance perspectives on the issues at hand. Right? And there is a disciplinary logic to that. The papers have been conceptual, they have been more inductive to some extent. Some have been more data-driven, some more theory-guided. They have been qualitative and quantitative. And this is not to qualify the papers, but it's to say that these complementary perspectives are required. But I think we can also, that what we've seen in the conference allows for one general conclusion that we would like to draw, and that is that we think that there's more empirical research that is needed, and using more systematic and comparative approaches. And this is not now talking only about the quantitative and research. It's to go beyond the single case and the single country studies. And we believe there's a lot to be learned in being more systematic about this. This means to contextualize better your case. That's the one route to go. We often have seen single case studies without much effort to contextualize, which also would then allow to generalize. Or you generalize by using systematic comparison. That would be the other route to go. And in particular, in light of the many sectoral studies and case studies of firms, there's quite some leeway in improving in this regard, in our view. Of course, it's not an easy journey, and there are challenges involved. One is that we are investigating a moving target, in the sense there's a lot of action, in particular in terms of policies, most notably regulatory measures. But that's also what makes this study of sustainability in GVCs particularly interesting. Another challenge is that many aspects of sustainability in GVCs are very difficult to measure. But what we have seen, and the slide on data is witness of that, is that these challenges are being taken on by a very active, creative, and innovative research community. And we hope that this conference could contribute to bringing this community closer together. Finally, a few words on policy and on what should be an evidence base to enhance sustainability in GVCs through better policies. What we noted is that in contrast to other fields, and Stefan comes more from the trade and development sphere, I would say development micro economist. Compared to these fields, many of the contributions, although not all, remain fairly vague with regard to their policy implications. In light of where we stand, I think this is not too surprising. Yeah, but what it shows is that there are many relevant policies that remain to be investigated, and the reason is that they are just being implemented. Think of the due diligence laws that are just being implemented as we talk. And we think that in 5 years from now, we will have 10 papers, say at the same conference here, that will look into the effects of these laws in various dimensions. Another reason why the papers may often be a bit vague in terms of their policy recommendations and conclusions is that this is often not so straightforward. The reasons are multiple. One is the complexity of value chains themselves. There are many effects that are triggered, for example, by regulations at various stages and at various levels in these GVCs. Then the set many dimensions of sustainability that are interconnected in complex ways themselves, be it the social aspect and the environmental, which may not go hand in hand. That, of course, complicates any recommendation that you may want to have. Yeah, related the ambiguous and complex effects of regulations and policies, as witnessed by what or as shown by what by our first example of even the simple trade policy triggering complex mechanisms. And fourth, the complexities of interventions themselves. And so take a tariff cut as a very simple trade policy measure, but look at the potential effects of due diligence regulations that will play out at the company level, that will trigger more complex changes than just a price reaction that you can simply observe in markets. Right? And finally, and related to that, the many compliance and enforcement issues. Okay, what you can see that there's still quite some work ahead of us, but we are confident that we'll take on this challenge as well. And I think we can all agree that an evidence base that takes on these complexities is urgently needed to inform policy, and it's also demanded. As we can see by the funds that the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development provides to the network, the Sustainable Supply Chains Network, the research network that hosts this conference. Yeah, there's also a link to the industrial analytics platform that is operated by UNIDO here, and more information on the issues discussed here on both of these websites. I think I would like to leave it here. I thank everybody for participating again for a conference that was really worthwhile. So we are also proud of the many interesting papers presented at the conference, and I'm looking forward to even more collaboration within this inspiring community. Thanks a lot, and a good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening, and a good night to wherever you are. All right. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.